Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We're discussing national political news of the day, and probably the biggest political news out of Washington is the House is still without a speaker. The chaos continues I don't know if we quite made it the news on the show last week, but Scalise dropped out. Is no real effective opponent of Jim Jordan at this point in time. But Jim Jordan is unable to get all of the votes he needs. He needs 217. There are 221 Republicans. He can only lose 4 Republicans, but there are, I believe, 18 or 19 Republicans who are running for re-election in either blue majority or blue plurality districts. There are probably a dozen or two more that are in close re-election, so they're all freaking out about not being saddled with having their Democratic opponents hit them over the head with the fact that they supported Jim Jordan. So the vote has come up twice. And he received, I believe, 200 votes on the first ballot and then 199 on the second, is my understanding. He is possibly losing further support. They only held one vote today. The way it works is you keep holding a vote until there's a majority. Meanwhile, all the Democrats are voting for their leader, Jim Jeffries, who's getting a lot of airtime right now. There's a lot to be done, including, whatever the U.S. response is going to be towards Israel. They're balking at even appointing the Israeli ambassador in the Senate, but that's a whole other story. But, the farm bill and keeping the government open, which the Republicans are afraid will hurt them in the 2024 election. So, of course, this all started when Matt Gaetz moved to have McCarthy removed, and they're in this mess. Some Republicans are screaming at the Democrats for not helping them get out of their own mess. But that's where we're at. Dave, do you see it resolving in the third vote tomorrow?
I really don't. I think it's almost. If it wasn't so tragic, it would be funny. Just how incapable of a coordination the majority party is. The issue was that they didn't really have anybody better than McCarthy that could balance the sort of the extreme Freedom Caucus folks along with moderates and then actual legitimate traditional conservatives. And thinking, the burn down the house approach, I forgot what we called them. I think former Speaker Boehner just said that they act as if they're terrorists, legislative terrorists. That's how he described the dissent within his own party. He's a Republican. They're Republicans, for the record. But no, I've been making predictions the last couple of weeks that they'd be able to find a leader in Scalise, just because he's already their majority leader, Steve Scalise, representative from Louisiana. But that that was not to be. And by going with Jordan, he's actually he's allies with all the sort of traditional cut the budget to the bone folks within his own party. He doesn't. He's not been doing himself any favors. So
he's got baggage from January 6th.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's actually a lot of baggage that he's got. Firstly, he's really on this show. We talk often about the political theater, the spectacle aspect, which I would argue is to rally the base and get support and kind of just be more of a firebrand. And it appeals to younger people. It appeals to the energetic, the discontents. But in reality, that's not a legislative strategy. So they're still kind of clinging to, or at least not clinging, but they're tracking towards that type of leader in Jordan. But I don't see it. And in fact, I was going to hold off until after we did the intro, but besides the January 6th events that he basically helped coordinate behind the scenes from the legislative side, and these theatrical types of hearings, for example, Hunter Biden, the Biden impeachment, but they go back 16 years. He's never introduced a bill that has become a law. So the entirety of his tenure has been about the sort of grandstanding as opposed to genuine leadership. But the again, we can get into the specifics of it, but there's been a pressure campaign over the weekend that's actually alienated his own party. So I wouldn't be surprised. At first, I thought that the holdouts were just looking for advantage. They were looking sort of like the Matt Gaetz and crew. Those guys, they went from opposing McCarthy to getting some concessions enough sufficient for McCarthy to become speaker. And I thought maybe that's what was happening. I thought that Scalise would be able to make the right negotiations.
I think the Democrats are already writing their campaign advertisements. That's what I think are the 20 or so odd people are afraid of. But go on.
Yeah, and so where we are now, and like I said, I wasn't really going to get into this until after we did the intros, but there you are. I think it's a good time to do it. The pressure campaign over this weekend has been immensely alienating, and we're talking about Republican representatives who might have authentic, legitimate grievance with Jim Jordan, his style, his lack of I don't know. I'll leave it up to everyone else to decide if he's a worthy speaker. But it doesn't seem that way on the surface anyway, just from his lack of accomplishments. But so Representative Womack from Arkansas really said, look, it's been attack. That's a quote. And he said, I can only speak to myself and what my staff have been through in the last 24 to 48 hours. It's really obvious that their strategy is attack the members who don't agree with you, attack them and beat them into submission. That, okay, you could say that might be energetic, but Representative Bacon's wife started receiving texts warning her husband to back Jordan, saying, quote, your husband will not hold any political office ever again. What a disappointment and failure he is. So they're targeting the family members.
Yeah, they've been threatening. This is their threats. Rather than trying to offer something, which is how it works in politics, they're threatening.
I'll give one more example. Representative Miller Meeks, Marionette Miller Meeks of Iowa, said that she, quote, received credible death threats and a barrage of threatening calls after flipping her speaker vote today. This is Wednesday when we're recording this. So she cast a ballot for Appropriations Chairwoman Kay Granger. Maybe that was a protest vote. Maybe that was sincere. But bottom line is now she's getting death threats today. So I don't think that's how you persuade and influence your peers.
And the only reason that they're even having to back Jordan, when we know, again, privately, this is the dynamic that they don't. McCarthy backed him just because they're desperate to get somebody in there, maybe hoping that he'll moderate. Sometimes leaders who are kind of extreme do moderate once they're in a position where their job is to build consensus. But I don't think he has the emotional maturity to do that. He certainly hasn't shown anything publicly, certainly not with his conduct during the impeachment hearings, which have been over the top ridiculous, and just interrupting people and asking a question and then not letting them answer. And then every time they tried to answer, he interrupted him because he didn't like the answer that was coming out of the witness's mouth. So he just figured he was not going to let it get on record and just kept interrupting, his own kind of filibuster of it. And the Democrats at the time just didn't have the strength or whatever, the resolve to just turn off his microphone, which is what they ought to have done. But anyway, I mean, and then you've got this whole questionable record of his career as a gym. We talked about it last week. So they've got a problem here. So the question is do any of the Republicans do what would have been done in the old days and approach the Democrats? Now, McCarthy said, no, I'm not going to give the Democrats anything, but they should vote for me anyway. Well, that's not how it works. And so you've got, 212 Democrats, is it, that are just voting for Jeffries. Let's point out that Hakeem Jeffries has come in first with every vote so far. Um, is there any possibility that there's two ways I see that the impasse can be broken if any Republicans, if at least 5 Republicans decide to be to decide they want to break away from the pack and not go down with the ship. One of them is it at all conceivable the 5 Republicans will vote for Jeffries? I don't see any movement towards that, but I think it would be really difficult for him. But I almost think if they did that, they pretty much have to switch parties, just with today's political climate. The other possibility is there has been talks of Democrats saying, "Why didn't you just keep the interim speaker Patrick McHenry in?" And we'll work with him, but we do want a few, we do want a few things in return. And is that there's talks that there is rumors that there are behind the scenes discussions going, whether or not they're serious or just kind of hypothetical. But I don't know what they do at this point because, definitely if you're in a blue district or a competitive district, you do not want an opponent saying, talking about how you supported Jim Jordan, especially since Jordan would probably be a disaster for the whole next year.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting state of affairs. I think that sort of 51% versus 49%. If there was two ways this could go, the least likely, the lesser likely, is that the Republicans will concede that they need Democratic help,
Mm-hmm.
and that they'll go the route of making concessions in exchange for votes. So that's definitely that's in the pipeline. It's being talked about, like you said, in
Mm-hmm.
part because there are some things that are shared interests that they have in common, such as like they know that if the government shuts down, all but about 10 people in the House know that if the government shuts down, it's going to look really bad for Republicans in the upcoming election, that they do need to figure out how to fund their priorities, keep things going. Um, like a corollary to that is right now, the global situation, to a certain extent, demands, and it's not hyperbolic, it demands that that America not be asleep at the switch, that we have a Congress that's ready to support allies, support the president, be in the loop, on behalf of their constituents, right? Like we all as citizens need our elected representatives. The House are the closest people we can relate to. It's just it seems likely that it's in everyone's best interest to get things going. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with the first thing you recommended, or sorry, that you mentioned, which is Representative McHenry, who is now the acting speaker. He's considered moderate. He's chair of the Financial Services Committee. And so the question is, like, how did he get to the position that he's in? And like, what can they, is there a path here? So there's a guy who did a editorial in the New York Times recently. His name's Brendan Buck. He said he's been on the staff of the last 2 Republican speakers. So he's definitely been around a little while. And what he's saying is that the rule that allowed for McCarthy to make McHenry his designated surrogate in case he was incapacitated, that rule is descended out of 9/11 continuity planning, basically. And so the House basically made up its own rule that said we need to have a rule that says if something happens to the speaker, this is what happens. But he said that he's asked colleagues on the Hill, and that nobody thought it would be the case that the House majority couldn't get together and elect
Yeah.
a speaker. So they didn't even plan for the contingency that there wouldn't be an election, a successful election. So that's where we are right now. And so that's why that McHenry only has the authority currently in writing to oversee an election. And what he's proposing for speaker, and what he's proposing is that, that because this is unprecedented times, that and I'm gonna crib this from Buck because this is his concept that he put out there. The cleanest solution is a vote of the body to give McHenry full legislative powers of the speaker, perhaps if only for a fixed period. So that's one thing that he pointed out, one detail of what's possible. And he said, or Growing talk of a bipartisan governing arrangement with Democrats voting to empower McHenry in exchange for rules favorable to the minority party. So really what's being floated is, how do we keep McHenry? Like, we can't decide. We're not sure how to go, where else to go with this. Let's figure out a way to extend the powers of the current, acting speaker.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have, I was trying to come up with a prediction for the end of the show as to what's going to happen, but I really don't know. I mean, they're out of options. I mean, the Republicans have catered, I'm sorry, to this insane ideology for so long that they're in this situation where they've got to approve somebody that they're trying to normalize. And I think that there's just not going to be the will to do that. So then, if not him, then who? Does McCarthy come back, as the senior thing? The problem is with that is that even people who would have supported McCarthy are, blaming his ineffectiveness for this. So nobody wants that either. That would look weak at this point. So I don't know what they do. They're going to have to figure something out, but you don't have a lot of political will. You've got people that are kind of nihilist in there that don't really care if the government shuts down, that feels vindicated if through the exercise of the power that they have because the election is so close. And the Democrats are basically just sitting back eating popcorn at this point. It's not their problem. You had, I forget who, Republican on NPR this morning saying, well, the Democrats, they ought to be, taking a stand here. It's like, well, yeah, they're voting for the person who's best in their view, Hakeem Jeffries. So, I don't know where they go from here, but it is going to be a problem.
I come to Israel with a single message. You're not alone. As long as the United States stands, and we will stand forever, we'll not let you ever be alone. Most importantly, the recent terrorist assault on the people of this nation has left a deep, deep wound. More than 1,300 innocent Israelis killed, including at least 31 American citizens, by the terrorist group Hamas. Hundreds of young people at a music festival. The festival was for peace, gunned down as they ran for their lives. Scores of innocents, from infants to elderly grandparents, Israelis and Americans, taken hostage. Children slaughtered, babies slaughtered, entire families massacred. Rape, beheadings, bodies burned alive. Hamas committed atrocities that recall the worst ravages of ISIS, unleashing pure, unadulterated evil upon the world.
Okay, meanwhile, we have this war that's blown up. I believe over 3,000 people dead so far, something like 700 or 800 Israelis. I believe about 23 or 2,400 Palestinians at last count. It's really horrific. We've all been horrified by the social media videos that we've seen of the Hamas attack on Israel, and of course Israel is retaliating. And a hospital in the Gaza was destroyed yesterday. Not absolutely clear whether it was caused by an errant missile from Israel or an errant rocket from Hamas. I doubt anybody purposely targeted it, but this is now what is creating a little bit of a sort of a crisis of support for Israel. Apparently the American intelligence has at least stated that they believe that it was a Hamas rocket rather than an attack from Israel. I don't think anybody believes that anybody did it deliberately, because there's nobody gains politically from it. Maybe Hamas sort of does if they can convince people that Israel did it and do it themselves, but that wouldn't. That's very convoluted, and it's a very very easy to get caught in something like that. Besides, rockets just aren't that accurate. I don't think they could have done that. So anyway, we have this crisis. And Joe Biden has basically taken the stand that as we discussed last week, is kind of mandatory for American politics right now, and that's unequivocal support for Israel. No message to hold back or go for a ceasefire. The Israel has stated they want to get in there and destroy these tunnels. Although not everybody came through tunnels for this attack, but they want to get in there and do that anyway. Biden is being complimented by people on both sides of the aisle and people who support Israel, and not really being slammed yet so heavily by the people who are opposed to Israel's policies with regard to the Gaza and the West Bank, just because we haven't reached a point where the memories of what's being called a pogrom are still with us, even though three times as many, more than three times maybe at this point, as many Palestinians have been killed as Israelis. But the head of the Republican Jewish coalition said that praised Biden's unwavering support for Israel at a critical time. David Friedman, who served as Trump's ambassador to Israel, credited the Biden administration for its moral, tactical, diplomatic, and military support. Republican Representative Derek Van Orden last Thursday said now is not the time to attack the Biden administration. Of course, Joe Biden went to Israel. He was going to go to Jordan, I believe, but because of the hospital thing, that got canceled. Maybe I got the country wrong on that. You can correct me, Dave. But
it's Jordan.
It is Jordan. Okay, thank you. It's being closely watched at home and abroad. As somebody who is very critical of Israel, and it's even this reaction, I have to say I don't know that Biden could do it any differently and not invite a whole lot of acrimony. Do it. I think he is walking the line as best as he can. Maybe privately, he's telling Netanyahu, you need to dial it back a bit. I don't know. We'll never know that. But at this point, the consensus is there needs to be unequivocal support. Dave.
Yeah, so we're trying to. I'll try to be as laser focused as I can on Biden and his performance. I know that's our topic for today. As you mentioned, that what could an American president do in a situation like this, and that is to firstly, it is the largest terrorist attack, murder of Jews since the Holocaust. Hard stop, right? So that's
of civilians.
Civilians, Jews. Right, yes. Right.
Yeah, and more people, a lot more Israelis died in the 6-Day War and the Yom Kippur War, but soldiers, we want to be real clear on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I misspoke, so thank you. So it's a historic event, hard stop, and it's a barbaric event, and so I think that that's why, because of the regional overlapping Venn diagrams of concern and consideration that quickly go global too. So we're not just talking about Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, which are the classic enemies against Israel, and to a lesser extent against the Sunni Arab states that were in the overtures of peace and recognition with Israel. And that seems to be, the general consensus amongst experts I've been listening to, watching, reading, is that that's the impetus for the attack. It's that the Abraham Accords under President Trump had basically sidestepped the Palestinian issue in the name of commerce, trade, and sort of the state level issues at the expense of the people level issues. So this was a way to bring the people back onto the radar. And of course, it's fully on the whole world's radar. This is the kind of thing that could exacerbate out into a much broader war, even world war. And I heard people say it, and it's not a cliche. It's actually true. World War I was unintended consequences. Countries had alignments and agreements with each other that one assassination rippled into every country in the advanced country fighting against each other. So this is the kind of thing that could go parabolic. The fact that we've got two entire carrier groups and that there's a NATO flotilla and that there is massive crackdown on free speech globally in the name of standing by the U.S. Israel, the Western Israel relationships. It can't be overstated how difficult that would be for president to manage. So far, it's relatively easy, and I think they did the like Kissinger style. Secretary of State Blinken flew around and went to all the heads of state in the region and tried to say, look, we all want to make peace. We all want to make it work, but we just can't say it like that. So for example, U.S. State Department is involved in memos that has said we're not saying ceasefire. We're not saying de-escalation. We're not saying peace yet. We're letting this play out. And not to just keep talking about it, but the flip side of this is if you look at it from the Israeli perspective, the leadership, the military, the foreign policy consensus currently in their war cabinet is that, look, this is a country this is a leadership of the region of Gaza, Hamas, that has said that they don't want there to be a Israel between the river, Jordan River, and the Mediterranean Sea. So that's I think that's the quicksand underneath all of this, because people rightfully say, but we've got a modern military, one of the most advanced, top 10 or 20 in the world, pummeling effectively unarmed civilians mercilessly, which nobody can stomach without critique. But you just can't say that critique, which makes it even harder.
Right. And then you can't even say ceasefire. It's just boggles the mind. But that's where we're at because of the horror of it. Because the Holocaust invokes a lot of really intense stuff, and these were, as you said, 700 civilians, many of them children. You can't even say, well, more Palestinian children have died, possibly as many as 700, some estimates by, and you can't say that. You've got to side with Israel unequivocally right now, not just to be popular here at home, but and maybe I can have you look at this, but also possibly to be effective at accomplishing peace, at accomplishing actually talking Israel out of an extensive invasion. Allowing Netanyahu into the political ammunition he needs. Ammunition is a bad word, but political capital he needs to be able to do that, to avoid a full-on scale invasion that will take hundreds of soldiers' lives and how many thousands of Palestinians. Maybe you want to comment on that aspect of it, that it's not really just about being popular at home, but it's about being effective in this situation. It may be the case, even though they have to alienate all the Arab countries.
Yeah, I mean that it's so incredibly challenging because you're hearing from the Israeli leadership that the Hamas leadership of Gaza just needs to be gone. Like that's not a credible peace partner. So again,
but the pressure that Biden is under right now, I don't know that he can do anything different and have a hope of having any influence on this.
So I think, like I started to say earlier, I think that the shuttle diplomacy was a way to say, look, we need to say, they've been asking what next. And so like the United States after September 11th, there was some outrage and then not a whole lot of peace. And then look what we had. We had 20 years of wars afterwards. So the United States is at least trying to get people to the table. And so that peace conference in Jordan that you mentioned, that was, again, the president of Palestine Authority, Abbas, the president of Egypt, the king of Jordan. We're going to get together and try to figure out some path to a new leadership post Hamas. In recent surveys, I think about 60 or so percent of people in Gaza support Hamas, which just means that they're popular, but out of desperation. So I think Biden really did try to thread the needle there, but that once this hospital was blown up, then it sort of put the rage back in the equation.
Yeah, yeah,
So they called for a day of rage. There were street protests across the region, but also around the world. Capitals all over the world, there's protest. It's just media is not really covering so much of how volatile this is globally, to try to just buy some time. It's already been a couple of weeks, right? I mean, there's
right.
already so they're biding some time here. But what comes next? Biden did go to Israel, and he did stand by the ally, Netanyahu, but stand by our allies. One of the things I mentioned last week too is that there's like funding pre-approved through 2028. $38 billion of money for
Right.
anything that Israel wants. They have access to any of our weapons. We've already been shipping them and staging them, and it's basically anything they want, they're going to get with. They have their own nuclear weapons that they don't really admit to. I think that is even part of it too, is that seems to be a double standard. But and again, rightfully so, because of the unique nature of this situation. This is why this is such a challenge.
Yeah. Now, so far, he's not getting a lot. Nobody of major political importance in the country is really attacking Biden. A few comments here and there, but they're actually does seem to be some understanding that he's walking a tightrope, and they need to not interfere with that, even if it's just that they're afraid of political backlash themselves. But a lot of the usual voices are being kind of quiet. We talked about the squad before. Well, AOC is pretty much backing Biden. The others made some comments. Cori Bush and Taib and the others made some comments that already got him into trouble, and they are just deciding to pretty much shut up right now. And so we're not getting a lot, and you're not even getting a lot from the Freedom Caucus that I can find. Again, a few comments here and there. DeSantis has sent his own plane in to take a couple hundred Americans out. The Biden administration, the government has already gotten about 4,000 Americans out of there that wanted to leave. It's including a couple senators, by the way. But it's there is so far. In terms of his performance, he has the political body politic behind him right now, at least so far. And again, would any other this is one thing that Biden has been good at. He was really good at this with Ukraine, putting together, with the long game in mind, not making any statements about how we're going to make sure we're going to crush terrorism or anything like that, but mostly framing it in terms of support for Israel. I think he's, if measured by the lack of negative response from American politicians, he seems to be in the right space, at least for that, whether or not you support what he's doing.
We have a situation where literally all around the world, people are in protest at the status quo, and the United States is one of the main supporters of the status quo. So that challenge is going to ripple through the electorate. There's a schism within our electorate. Like I said, we're going to talk about where younger people and more progressive people see things a little bit differently. But all things being equal, centrists, older folks. So there's this bipartisan consensus that it's a rough neighborhood over there, and that if there's a neighbor that comes across your border and murders people and says they want to extinguish your existence, that you get a lot of leeway in how you choose to defend yourself. One last thing I'd mention too is that the Palestinian Authority is actually at the wrong end of this too. So President Abbas is actually being protested against. The government of the West Bank is also being seen as complicit in the status quo, especially in part because they were about to step up to the table and engage in peace without really properly effectively adjudicating Palestinian liberties in Gaza.
river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Arkansas fly, Arkansas fly, Arkansas fly, Arkansas fly, Arkansas fly,
Okay, this brings us to our third segment. We're going to discuss the impact of the Mideast conflict on a certain aspect of politics in the United States. Now, anti-Semitic violence and rhetoric has gone up over the past years, actually pretty much consistently since 2015. You can blame a lot of different things on that, but it is reaching a pitch recently. I will point out that there was a pro-Palestinian rally in San Francisco over the weekend, and there was some graffiti, I think, on the Bank of America building that said "Death to Settlers." And settlers, we're not just talking about settlers on the West Bank. The idea of settlers is that all Israeli citizens are settlers and therefore are worthy of death. The FBI is actually investigating that as a hate crime, but and the San Francisco District Attorney Brooke, I'm forgetting Jenkins, I think, is made a tweet relating it to the rally. The organizers of the rally really pushed back on that, saying, maybe it was somebody who attended our rally, but that is not what we stand for. And they took that tweet down. But we've got rhetoric across the globe. I mean, it's expanded. We've seen some incidents in Germany and France, but it is, again, anti-Semitism is a problem here in the United States, has been forever, and it is aggravated by this situation. Particularly when you have a left wing that is sort of caught between the moralism of anti-colonialism and anti-Semitism. And, how far do you indulge comments and rhetoric that is deemed anti-colonialist when it veers into anti-Semitism? The textbooks in the schools in Gaza, West Bank, and Jordan, by the way, have at least at various points contained claims of blood libel, which is an anti-Semitic trope, of false Talmud quotes, which were originated with the Nazis, and they have made it into these rhetoric. And then you find a lot of left-wingers here repeating these things, that the Talmud says these things about people when it doesn't. And it's a real difficult situation. We can go into a number of examples, but I do want to, I'm going to give it to you, Dave, and then I want to come back and I want to talk about an organization that has been dear to me. I was a membership for like the first 10, 15, 20 years of my adult life, Democratic Socialists of America. And it used to have a progressive Zionist contingent. No more. They have gone full Kool-Aid of just it's one side is evil and the other side is with the angels, and that's it. And but I'll come back to that because it's not the only part of the left that's doing this. But the question is, at what point does sharp criticism of Israel become anti-Semitism? And that is a tricky question. It's a real tricky question that the left has had to contend with. I'm going to let you talk about this, Dave, and then I'll have some more comments to say.
Sure, thank you for that setup. Definitely, I think one good way, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, that there's younger folks, more progressive folks are not seeing things quite the same way as prior generations or more moderate people. There's the president of the Andrew Mellon Foundation coined a term. Her name's Elizabeth Alexander, called the Trayvon generation. So a generation of young people who have come of age since the killing of Trayvon Martin, And this is according to Charles Blow in the New York Times. He says, quote, "It's a generation that has become highly attuned to intersectionality, the history and current expressions of various forms of oppression, and the ways in which colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism undermine the concepts of equality and justice." So if that is the prism through which contemporary politics are viewed for many progressives and many young people, the Israeli-Palestine conflict has a sort of there's a tractor beam of support behind the plight of the Palestinians. Now the question is, how does that translate to anti-Semitism? Well, looking at, I read through a few Anti-Defamation League reports, one that just came out in August. They're tracking all over the world increases in anti-Semitism and permeating mainstream political parties, permeating mainstream political activity. It's not sort of the old-fashioned. It's not entirely the old-fashioned, just pure hate, bigotry, ignorance, the typical things that would lead you to say, those people, air quotes, whatever you're going to project onto a people, that's ignorance. I mean, that's bigotry, of course. But we're seeing the ADL and others, other bodies, for example, the European Union itself is starting to say, look, it's anti-Semitic if. And they're starting to define anti-Semitism as just about anything that is not sympathetic to the plight of Israel. And that's so in a sense, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. This is really a very thankless conversation to get involved in, and I don't recommend people take it very lightly, because there's death threats out there, etc. But this gets to the point of what you were saying. Progressive House members, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, they're unapologetically out there having these really difficult conversations. Now, often it takes a group of people who know each other, trust and respect each other, and know that they really want to try to reach a better understanding, to collaborate in this type of discourse. But to have it out there in Twitter land and social media land, and out on the front pages of the press every day, in response to a global crisis, in response to a horrific act of terror, the circles don't quite overlap. It's not the case that it's easy to give for most people to give much credence to the critique. In the United States, we're good at it. We have a history of alliance with Israel, but around the world, and like I said, even within our own country, younger people, more progressive people, for them, two things can be true at once. It can be true that both Israel needs to have the dignity and respect of a state. We talked about it last week, that when the Jewish people of Judea during the Romans, not everybody left. A lot of those people that were there, that stayed there over the thousand years, almost 2,000 years, they became Palestinian people. They became people who occupied that place perpetually. So the colonialism and the imperialism prism doesn't exactly work when there are folks who have thousands, I think 4,000 years of history in that region, the Jewish people. Yeah. So there's no beginning, there's no baseline to even begin to have an intelligent conversation for most people, especially in the public forum. So your original question was, is anti-colonialist rhetoric veering into anti-Semitism? It is, especially the way anti-Semitism is getting defined right up to the edge of polite conversation, and anti-colonialism rhetoric is getting defined right up to the headlines of today's newspapers. And so we really are seeing a collision course. And I'll just give you one more example before I get back to you. The idea of BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. That's people saying, look, we're not really sure how to help the Palestinians negotiate with Israel, so that they would comply with international law. Let's try this. And it's considered anti-Semitic by many. It's highly controversial, but people support it. People like talking about it. People like trying to do something on behalf of the Palestinians. Now, fast forward to today, where the death of 700 civilians that's being used as justification for almost a complete blinders on international law. But if you look at the military leaders, I listened to some American generals, I listened to some Israeli former leaders and current leaders, and they're defining their actions in Gaza very, very in a very sterile way. So they're basically like they're not acknowledging the same basic rules of law.
All
So
right.
it's a real challenge for people to even have this discourse in public.
I want to use again DSA as a focal point. DSA stands for Democratic Socialists of America. They came together in the late 60s when the Socialist Party split up into three. Well, actually, the Socialist Party originally split up into three tendencies, and one of them was going to continue to run as a third-party Socialist Party. Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee broke off under the leadership of Michael Harrington, wrote The Other America, famous socialist in this country for years, and they were going to operate within the Democratic Party. Later on, they merged with a new left group called the New American Movement, led by Dorothy Healy and also Barbara Ehrenreich, which were sort of the moderate versions of SDS that broke off in opposition to the Weathermen and the rest. So you had new left and kind of old left coming together under joint leadership of Michael Harrington and who would become famous author Barbara Ehrenreich, famous for Nickel and Dime and the rest. Anyways, this went on for years. They considered themselves the American representative of the Second International. So did the Socialist Party, and so did the third group that I'm not going to get into right now. But this was considered, and the biggest chapter was in New York City, heavy Jewish involvement, old time, politics and the rest. So they I think they at one point were maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people. They grew over the years, particularly in the 90s, and they drew in a lot of younger kind of radical people who basically in about 7 or 8 years ago, decided to leave the Second International, the Socialist International, because it is colonial and all of the kind of the modern rhetoric. And out of that, people like Ocasio-Cortez and other leaders arose from it. They always had Ron Dellums as a member. They've always had some congressional representations, but it's been criticized as becoming very kind of radical, very kind of authoritarian in a lot of ways, more Leninist than Trotskyist in terms of the socialist communist split, right? So and it's really come out recently, and there was a demonstration in New York City that has generated a lot of backlash against it, that had a lot of what AOC referred to as bigotry. She actually called it out as bigotry. Now, she hasn't officially left DSA yet, but I believe somebody else who was in Massachusetts, I'm forgetting the name of the member, has renounced his membership in DSA because of this rhetoric. And the organization is in trouble. They've grown to about 10,000 people, very lot of activism. Now, and it looks like they're going to split because the Los Angeles DSA head said they don't want to have anything to do with the National. National has apologized for all this, but this is the politics we're in. The left has to decide kind of where it stands on this. And the Zionism is racism thing. It's often been misunderstood. It's not perceived as racism because Jews are a race. It's perceived as racism because it created a system of what they want to compare to apartheid. But to get into that, you would have to compare Hamas to the ANC, African National Congress. African National Congress had a policy, even though they had violent revolution, to not attack civilians, to attack only military and industrial targets and political figures if they could. But they had an ethos about it. Hamas is that the ethos appears to be kill any Jew you can find. And in the name of this revolution, and the American, so the American left doesn't want to take this on because they don't want to be seen as pro-colonial in any way. This is they link it to the struggles against racism here, and they say this is an inflection point. We've got racial, young black men being shot by cops here, and you've got what's going on in Hamas, and they believe it's a fair comparison. And to stand to condemn Hamas, even though they say I don't necessarily support what they did, but to condemn Hamas for these actions is just it's a struggle to get that to happen. This is a very complex problem, and the left has struggled with it for a long time. What we have to remember is that Israeli founder Ben Gurion was a socialist. Golda Meir was a socialist. The country is a socialist to the core, as right-wingers like to point out. There's so much complexity here. The kibbutzes, including the one that was attacked, are a form of direct democracy socialism. And is it fair? Of course, a lot of people would say, well, look, if Jews needed a homeland, why didn't we drop it on top of Germany, who committed the Holocaust? Why are we imposing it on people who never had anything to, based on this 2,000-year-old claim to the land? As you pointed out, a lot of Jews had been there to begin with, but there was a mass immigration of Ashkenazi European Jews into the country after 1948. So we can't totally go there. This is so complicated, and we've only got, we're trying to do this in 8 minutes, but the left has to come to terms with this. It has to come up with a way that you can support Palestinian struggle, but not support murder. To oppose Israeli government, but not be but not be anti-Semitic about it, not be anti-Jewish about it. It's so complicated, and I don't know that we even did it justice.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
Well, that brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
Well, I'm going to stick to the theme. I know the last two shows we've talked about this. I've personally talked about the speaker race, and I thought that the cooler heads would prevail and there would be a moderate solution, but it looks like there's just a little bit too much dysfunction going on. I think that what we talked about earlier in this show, that there is a path to make it happen, which is to just have the acting speaker temporarily be given more power sufficient for the House to continue with some regular operations, because there's a bipartisan consensus that it has to happen. So my prediction is that Patrick McHenry will be his powers will be expanded, and he will be like an acting speaker of the House, and that might even happen before this weekend.
I am going to make the same prediction. I'm also going to predict that they will give him certain powers to do things, and they'll struggle along for the rest of the year until they get to January. There's not going to be any major change then. This is not an election year, so there won't be a lot of new Congress members. But I do believe that Henry is going to be the speaker until at least January, when you have to, I believe that eventually the Republicans will probably find a way just to make him the plain old speaker, even if it means trying to attract a few Democrats across the aisle, and the Democratic leadership allows them to do that without political consequences. It doesn't seem like a likely solution, but it seems like there's like about 20 things, each thing like a 5 or 7% chance, but it's got to be one of them. And so I would say that has like a 15% chance of happening. So I'm going to go with that one.
The times call for it. I think we're on the same page. It's critically important.
All right. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.